Greetings, BookTube. This is ML Clark coming to you with Better Worlds Theory YouTube edition. It's been a while. I'm joined as always by my special guest, The Highway. But The Highway bothers me less these days, considering the other special guest in the background of all our lives, the state of the world. And as folks who follow me in other spaces know, these last few weeks have been tremendously uprooted by a new living condition. I'm taking care of a teenager who has a very difficult range of circumstances, and so those life events have kept me away from being able to do a lot of the work I usually do. It's all useful praxis as a human being, and at the same time, it is something that somehow keeps me in contact with the broader state of the world simply because some of the challenges on our front are created by a lot of things that are going on elsewhere. So everything's connected. And as much as we can help one another locally, we are in some ways responding to the global state of affairs as best we can. Still, it is a lot. I'm also undergoing some major transformations that I can't fully talk about yet, but they essentially mean that I'm working hard to try to adjust and figure out and streamline other project workflow while I adjust and ready for the adoption of a new formal position. So everything is just a little bit uneven these days. And in the middle of it, it's sometimes difficult to be able to sit and just enjoy literature the way that I used to, I think. Some people will say that when you become a writer in a professional capacity, it can be a lot more difficult to find those moments where you just breathe out and enjoy good work. I don't necessarily see that as the problem. It's more the administrivia that sometimes comes with life, but to each their own. Today, though, I did want to sort of bind together two other worlds. One of the worlds is the world in which, for the last few months, I have been the managing editor of SFWA Publications. It's a volunteer capacity, but definitely in charge of a lot of different projects and guiding a lot of different processes. One of those processes has connected me with the author, the editor of the work I want to discuss today. Stephen Kotowych works with me on the Nebula Awards Showcase project. He is the lead editor on the project. But I will say that I do a lot of the work behind the scenes, so if there are any problems with it, you blame me. And you can give him full credit for all of the good stuff in terms of curating and getting things to where they need to be. What we did in the last few months is get this series caught up after being pretty much 4 years out of date. And there are reasons for that. These things don't just happen out of the blue. A lot of valiant work was done by previous volunteers, but the real problem was that a couple years before the series fell into its state of delay, the organization had shifted to an in-house model, and there are reasons for that. Again, things happen logically at the time. The problem is that when you move to an in-house model instead of having something done by a professional publisher, you are relying on volunteers to do a lot of hard work. And so when Stephen and I gathered up this project, starting last September, really kicking into gear October and November, we knew that we had to try to put everything together in a cohesive collective fashion, or we would just be trapped forever. We got everything caught up more or less by the end of March. March 25th was our launch date. After a few more fiddly bits, we were just in the process of confirming the few little elements of the print, just because Amazon is a fickle beast. And I'm just going to be so happy when those checks have gone through. I'm holding on putting in that order for the full author copies until everything just looks really nice. I think after all this time, our authors deserve that. But going forward, you're going to see Stephen, his words in an essay in the next piece. And it's still, I should say, it's still very much a collaborative effort because the final say, this still goes through the office of the executive director. So when we say that Stephen's name is on it and then I'm working in the background, it's going to sound very chaotic, but there are still many processes and people behind the work. What I'm really excited about is having Stephen continue to come to the fore of this project and be our lead editor going forward for this work, the voice that grows with this collection. The Nebula Awards Showcase is something very special for writers, especially. Inside our industry, there are many awards for science fiction and fantasy. The Nebulas are the Writers' Choice Awards, more or less. They are writers voting on fellow writers. And if this seems insular, yes, it is insular. If you want to get a prize that comes from the fan base, that's probably the Hugos. There are others, but there are many different prizes for different bodies of people interested in science fiction and fantasy. But I think there's something really special about writers celebrating other writers. And so that is the kind of work this entire showcase is supposed to do. And we are now working, even though I'm still emphatic, we're waiting until we see the print job. I want absolutely every little last detail fixed and perfect, or to the best of our ability. Real perfection is impossible. Before we send those out, we're already working on our next piece, the 60th showcase, to get it ready for the Nebulas in June. So we have a tight schedule on that. And yet in the middle of that, again, writers uplifting writers is why I want to take time to talk about Stephen's other series, the series that makes me so excited to have him as our lead editor and the voice growing into this role more and more every year going forward of our showcase series. So Stephen Kotowych is a Canuck like me, and he also runs and has curated this wonderful collection, the year's best Canadian fantasy and science fiction. That is what you see if you're watching the video. The volume 2 is what I want to talk about today. I'm not going to go into each story. There are a lot of stories here. I want to talk in broader terms about that work of anthology building and also generally what it means to have a work of Canadian fiction. This is, I think, an especially potent topic considering the state of the world again, because there's the question of national identity and how national identity is forged. And when I go through this work, I definitely found many elements that resonated with my understanding of Canadian literature as somebody who has an extensive background in CanLit, uh, just as a Canadian growing up in that body of discourse, as well as science fiction and fantasy, to being able to blend those two different media. And yet, the most important first element comes back to, I think, Hugo Gernsback himself. It comes back to the idea that commercial science fiction was itself a created genre in the sense that a body of literature existed. Speculative fiction has been around as long as there has been fiction. That's just the dominant mainstream mode for human storytelling. Realism, in some ways, is much more of a niche, arbitrary, and very strongly geopolitically associated term. But speculative fiction has been with us since the start. Hugo Gernsback came around and created a commercial form that had very strong influences that were very Americanized. So very much a new frontier for American Western mythology, and a lot of different complicated tensions between, well, a lot of white people and non-white people, or non-white coded alien forms, and other elements too, in terms of a rising sense of US exceptionalism when it came to technology and to the domination of landscape. So, science fiction has a very strongly US feel to it in its commercial form. And often with the rest of literature as well, Canlit has often been defined in some ways by the absence of certain themes that one finds in US literature. We have very different approaches, for instance, to migration and immigrant discourse. We have very different lived histories, haunted histories of slavery and any kind of racialized conflict as it carries forward into the world today. Those kinds of oppressions, carceral justice, even when it comes to issues with nation building, obviously, we have different pressure points with respect to stories of how the nation was made. In Canada, we have a lot of erasure, for instance, around the construction of our railway, which is built into early literature with a certain structure that cherished a lot of European immigrants and erased the existence of a lot of Chinese immigrants in particular who did tremendous work. We do have histories of erasure and oppression, but they tend to come out in more muted ways in our literature. And so as a result, we're sometimes seen as a sort of US fiction light. It's just we have characters and notions of colonial identity that are similar, just quote unquote missing things. And yet, that's not necessarily the most effective way to talk about Canadian literature. We do have modalities of our own, and I'd almost say that it's not quite erasure, but there is this emphatic silence, a sort of top down silence that can be seen in our literature. We impose the idea of the Great White North and this sort of blank, primitive landscape just waiting to be met. Maybe not conquered, but certainly met. And it's not empty. Turtle Island has always been full, and there have been many different peoples with stories here long before us. But we do have that fetishization of sort of a wide open landscape, and it can come up in other ways, in other kinds of erasures on a more contemporary level. You'll also find in our literature a lot more focus on liminal spaces, diaspora, conditions for people, especially in an intergenerational context. We have a very common way of writing in which we will have a contemporary struggle between young people trying to find their identity juxtaposed with an interwoven narrative about something that happened in the past for that family, and the two of them will intersect maybe in some kind of reckoning or resolution. We also have a lot of sarcasm, and I don't think Canadians get enough credit for how macabre and how sarcastic we are. We might do it in a slightly more deadpan way, but it is there, and we are very comfortable having stories avoid the pat ending or the overly comfortable ending, compared to a lot of American literature where sometimes things are resolved maybe a little bit more quickly than you'll find in Canadian literature. And there's a lot more agency that's sort of thrust upon our protagonists in the United States. Canadians, again, may be tied into that notion of being small and helpless against that great expanse, do sometimes get away with storytelling that is a little more open ended, a little more passive when it comes to Western modalities for the protagonist and what they can do in their circumstances, and is also inscribed in a way that allows for incompleteness. So little scraps, little odd stories that are more like a soundbite or an impression. I'm also forgetting the important part about religion. Religion is extremely different in Canada and the United States. One of this major components, again, comes down to this very tacit sort of top-down silence. It is inappropriate for a Canadian politician to talk openly about their faith. It's considered vulgar. It's a very strange thing. It's not done. People don't ask questions in debates about your faith. It's just not done. It's just your personal life. You have your private experience of it, and it's considered quite hypocritical and uh, antithetical to a meaningful discourse about politics. In the United States, that's not true. In the United States, there's a lot of fixation on performative faith, and the symbolism that comes with it can sometimes really blur in the public sphere and in the political sphere. So we do have, for instance, a lot of narratives around religion in Canada can be tied into Mennonite traditions, Lutheran traditions. There are bodies of literature that focus on a sort of waspy experience in contrast with sort of French Catholicism or maybe Irish Catholicism in certain maritime contexts. But it's just different. And when I talk about the French Canadian too, that province has a few histories of relative isolationism in contrast with the rest of Canada, which were profoundly important for cultivating their own sense of literary history, which means there's a lot more prose poetry. There's a lot more of just very different touchstones and conversations that are happening in that prose too. So this is all in the background of the work that Stephen Kotowych has put together. And when we come to the question of why would you put something like this together, again, we come to that question of what it means to have a national identity and how national identity is constructed. So it's constructed, I would say, in work like this. And that's also, again, why I think Stephen is just such a phenomenal voice as an anthologist. his essay, his opening essay, is just wonderful. In this one, it's giving the year in review of 2023, and it's very thoughtfully looking at a variety of challenges facing writers in the moment. It's paired as well in this collection with some lists of some of the major award winners for Canadian science fiction and fantasy outside of the names that are included here. There's quite a range in the stories themselves, and that's the other challenge: is how do you properly put together a collection that covers a fairly wide range of experiences? I think Stephen has done a phenomenal job in putting together that range here. You might see that best in the stories that are very much informed by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis discourse, in as much as another important Canadian experience, a long-standing experience with First Nations peoples, is figuring out a way to have a literature of one's own that is not beholden to or subordinate to colonial narratives and settler narratives and just regular Canadian narratives. The stories of Turtle Island are their own. And you'll see in a couple of the pieces in this collection stories in which, even though there are interactions with a very colonizer context, you are still centered in that voice, which is very comfortably its own, of invoking and inspired by First Nations experience. So we have here again some of those pieces that are a little bit sarcastic, and I hope that some of you can get the sort of like macabre sense as well. There are also pieces that invoke the inevitable imagery: snow, just in a different world, a different planet, but still dealing with snow and survival and the creature friends that one makes along the way. So you do have that resonance point. It's funny, I'm not going to talk about all the stories here. I do want to say that because of the way we also deal with migrant experience, we are a mosaic, not a melting pot. And that shows up in stories that are by writers with a wide range of backgrounds, and they might not necessarily be set even in the country itself. This collection allows people who are citizens, permanent residents, and the term used in this collection is expat. I don't use that term for myself. I don't like that term. I am an immigrant. But some people do. I find that term to be a little bit elitist and very much buying into some very strange cultural discourse. But some people do use it. So the point is, what makes you Canadian is not as rigidly tied to green card or the very rigid notions of belonging that you'll sometimes get in not just the US context, but also anxieties in its literature. And that fluidity is really well reflected here in stories by people who identify as Canadian or who have connections with the territory on which Canada exists, but which are set in different spaces that tie into other elements of their cultural tradition. Oddly enough, the opening story is the exception that proves the rule, and it's also maybe one of the most uncomfortable reads at this time. So I'll let you enjoy some of the others on your own. I really do hope you pop through this. You're going to see as you do some surprises. It's like, hey, I know that name. That person's famous. They've been nominated for a major award. I thought they were, from the US or something like that. It's like, yes, Canucks are everywhere. So some of this literature, even though it is ours, it's not just ours. It does also belong to a global literature, which is as it should be. The first piece by Cory Doctorow is The Canadian Miracle. And this one, I'm going to just tell any USian readers who might be thrown by it, it is the most direct in its confrontation with US identity in a way that I don't think it even feels like science fiction anymore. It's just reality now. It's very close to reality. I'm going to read a paragraph from this, but it makes sense because Cory Doctorow has been working with a lot of digital rights advocacy and that ties into and anti-corporate overreach advocacy that ties into the US as well as Canada. So he's also a very strong globalist with really important ties in pushing back on encroachment from US businesses. This is the paragraph. Quote, the National Volunteers and their Texas vanguard who descended on Mississippi to mix voter registration with relief efforts muddied our mission and we muddied theirs. MAGA clubs never cared about truthfulness and nuance under the best of circumstances, and in the chaos of the flood relief, it was easy for them to conflate, quote, foreign aid workers, unquote, and, quote, outside political organizers, unquote, and come up with, quote, foreign interference in a U.S. election, unquote. These were the 6 scariest words in the American phrase book, words to conjure up a bipartisan QAnon/BlueAnon horde. This is the most Americana you're going to get in this collection, but it is a story that definitely highlights the fact that there are some anxieties and some tensions with respect to the Canadian difference. And yet, again, the vast majority of this collection will show you stories that are just very comfortably existing in their moment, written by people who have a wide range of cultural backgrounds that they bring to their literature as well as to their geopolitics. So, again, Canada is not an emptied version of US literature. It's not US literature with a few themes left out. It does have a very distinct sense of silence around a few elements where maybe more discourse should exist. And there is something to that power in the backdrop of what we're writing, that overwhelming, it's just not done, it's just not said, we just don't speak about these things. And the ways that our literature has emerged around that weird tension created by that notion of um, the expanse that we are entering into and the wide open wilderness that we are availing ourselves to has created some very quirky cultural moments on the page. And that's true for our regular literature. It's true for our literature and genre, which, again, as I said, is the baseline for all literature. Speculative fiction has existed long before the commercial genre. And it's just that a collection like this, which is going forward, Stephen, while working with us to help with the Nebula Awards series, to lead it forward, is also doing this work to craft a story or a version of the story for the experience of people who are gathered together under the notion of Canadianness. So, sitting with this collection isn't just about affirming a national identity or drawing a line in the sand. It's about coming together thoughtfully and asking what it means to have a shared sense of space and a shared sense of discourse on the page. There are a wealth of wonderful authors here. I'll put that whole list inside the notes for this piece, but I just wanted to introduce this work. And again, to highlight the same way that the Nebula Awards Showcase is supposed to be writers celebrating writers. It is the fruits of our Nebula Awards every year, put on the page to be enjoyed amongst ourselves. It's just fair that the people who have been working behind the scenes to bring us up to date and to get everything back to where it belongs in that process are also celebrated for the work they're doing as well. It's very easy. It's happened often in this organization, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, that we just pour ourselves so much into the work of helping others that we sometimes lose part of ourselves in our own creative practice. That's not how it should be, but sometimes it's just the nature of volunteer organizations in chaotic times, and we've had a lot of chaotic times. Have you noticed? There have been a few. So the work today is about celebrating somebody I've just been absolutely thankful to work with, not just because he's a fellow Canuck, but because this is somebody who has done tremendous work of the kind that I love best, which is uplifting other writers. And I really do hope that you will also take into consideration the year's best Canadian fantasy and science fiction anthologies. You will love, I'm sure, the essays at the beginning in which he gives a snapshot of the year. They're useful whether you're Canadian or not because they deal with issues of relevance to writers in genre in general. And just sit with the idea of what it means to be together in community and to create a shared history, a shared sense of space for oneself on the page and through the wild and wonderful world, not of this sort of pristine landscape that we have in the Great White North, but of the possibilities that emerge when you are dabbling in speculative fiction of any form. So that's it from me for now. Thank you very much for your time. Really, again, I cannot stress enough, these are terrible times. We're going through so much. It is hard, it is scary, it is stressful. And at the same time, being able to lean into any kind of creative practice can be an excellent complement to the work you do as a human being, showing up with and for one another it is just part of how we build the vocabularies we need of strength to go forward. So I wish you the best in yours, whether you are directly creating, supporting creators, or just working on being the best human being you can right now. It all matters very much. Thank you for your time, and hopefully again we'll see you soon. We have a Clark's World issue that we need to get to. It has one of my stories in it, and I am still waiting to read the rest of the TOC. Okay, talk soon. Cheers.